It did. Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy Friday. Tim here, Team Tim with Tim Schnurr, Jesse Miller, and our good friend Jacob. You all get me in your face one more time again this week live. Turn my volume down over there while I'm restreaming. Hey, all right. It's like I've never done this before or anything. So, hey, everybody, happy Friday. We're really excited to be back again here with Team Tim. I know we kind of lost our cadence. We're trying to get back into the groove, except I'm leaving it next week. So, Mr. Schnurr, hey, buddy, come on up, say hello. How are you, my friend?
What's going on? Yeah, it's great to be back. I know we're doing these at a little different cadence now, but Tim Schnurr, I work at a company that I founded called Lease Trust, leasetrust.com, that does hardened laptops for retirees, high net worth individuals, Chromebooks, but we use some, they're really dedicated towards investing in finance. So great episode coming up this week. This is part 2 of our 3-part GRC. What is governance? What is risk? What is compliance? I actually got the order screwed up. So this week we're talking about what is compliance, but, excited to have Jacob on, who really is someone I've learned a lot from in our short conversations in the past. So excited to have him on and talking about, what is compliance.
Hey, Jacob. So we'll give you a second. I just want to touch on something Tim said, right? It's funny because I've talked to a few different MSPs in the last couple of months, and 2 specifically are doing kind of what you're doing over there at Lease Trust. They're going after high net worth kind of individuals and firms and that kind of stuff. And it was really interesting. I should make sure I remember who they are and connect the 2 of you. Definitely. Enough of that. Jacob, how are you? Give us a little shout out. Talk a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate being on. Dave Kane, I head up the cybersecurity risk practice here at Salus GRC. So I was bound to be here for this series. The company name there is the Governance, Risk, and Compliance. And what we do is a combination of regulatory compliance and cybersecurity. I head up that cybersecurity group, primarily for investment firms. So a long time in the space, an MSP veteran and ex-MSP person myself, but now here full-time on that cybersecurity side of things.
Nice. So you're doing a little crossover with Tim on the whole finance worth stuff, a little bit of crossover. Hey, Jacob, if you need help with that stuff and hardening those endpoints and managing those, I got a friend over here, Tim, that can do, as an MSP, that can help you do that.
That is awesome. We do not want to manage. We do not want to harden, as we always say when we're working with MSP partners at different ones of our clients. A lot of our team, we've been in the MSP business. It is a hard business. We are very happy where we are now. We do not want your job. A good one.
Well, that's why if you don't want their job, it's probably because they're not totally operationally efficient, which is why we have Jesse.
Oh man, look at that segue. It's like you have done this before. So yeah, I'm Jesse Miller, founder of Power PSA Consulting and founder or creator of the Power Good vCISO system. We help MSPs, MSSPs, and vCISOs crack the code for vCISO profits.
Oh my goodness. So Jesse's on crack now with the code for VCs. So I love it. So we're just like, wait a minute. Tim's the one like Jersey and New York and hold on. So
I don't know where you're going with that.
I suppose talk a little bit about us. Tim Golden, founder, CEO of Compliance Scorecard, where we help keep your risk in check. See across the bottom, where Compliance Scorecard helps you and your MSP have that risk conversation with your customer using our scorecards. All right, enough of that. All right, what the hell are we talking about today? It was supposed to be risk, but we all got it messed up, or my dyslexia, and now we're talking compliance.
It was me. I apologize, Tim. But yeah, so what is compliance? Once again, another kind of, I'll call it nebulous term, right? I mean, we talked about governance last week, and 2 weeks ago, we stumbled through it a little bit, but we did get to, I think, a pretty clear definition of what is governance, why is it important, how do we do it, what does it involve? So this week, what is compliance? I came into cybersecurity 5-10 years ago, and I think the word compliance was pretty strange to me. I actually, Jacob, I used to work in financial services, and compliance would mean, don't trade on things that the firm was working on, or, I come from more of like a, SEC compliance or FINRA compliance, or Boiler Room, if we've ever seen some of these movies, right? Like, don't do that kind of stuff, right? Wolf of Wall Street. So what is compliance? I guess we'll start with that. I think we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity compliance, but why don't we start with what is compliance? Tim, looks like you're ready to go first.
Well, I was going to say, 20 years ago, before I got into this mess of stuff, compliance in my head kind of meant like the UL, right? Like making sure the electrical things in my house are compliant to, I don't know, energy stings, or having seatbelts in our cars so that we're compliant for seatbelt things. But when I got thrown into this mix back in 2006, it was a whole different world. NIST 853, FTC, SEC, all the mouthful of crap. And compliance in a nutshell, things that are regulated that you have to do, in my brain, simple enough.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was gonna, as we were talking about this leading up to this week, I was thinking about this, and immediately I wanted to jump to, well, it's a government mandated thing, but that's not necessarily true, right? You have things like PCI or industry regulated standards, which aren't right, exactly, which aren't regulated by any sort of government or state entity. They're an industry mandated term. So I think we do have to broaden that a little bit. And I like what Tim said, but I think where you can, for me, you draw the line is when there is some sort of punitive measure to enforce a standard. That to me makes compliance.
Yeah, Jacob,
the punitive part is interesting.
Yeah, I feel like Jesse took a bunch of it there. So I was, definitely looking at that of some idea, right? Whether that's a government or other regulatory body or industry association, but there is some external set of rules that have a minimum standard of your compliance with them. And again, I think that's a good way of putting it, Jesse, right? Punitive damage, where those are, right? Not just operating at your own risk, but there could be some form of censure.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. I like where you're going there. And SROs, self-regulatory organizations, which seems like probably the lion's share of compliance, at least in cybersecurity, right? Like, there are some FTC, SEC, some regulatory bodies that are government related, but I think a lot of it is SRO with like SOC 2. Even NIST is, although it is a standard, who's actually enforcing it? I think that it's a little shaky there. So we obviously have a lot of standards. We have a lot of compliance regulations, either from self-regulatory organizations or government-based, which creates kind of a mixed field of, when we say compliance, is it, what are we actually chasing here, or why is it important?
Right. And I think there's one there where Tim hit upon something, talk about this, right? Where sometimes the difference between a framework and a compliance standard.
Yeah.
Right? And those are not always one and the same. They often leverage one another, where they might be looking on something and saying, hey, you need to be compliant. We might suggest that you use NIST or CIS or some other framework for doing it, but there's a different set of requirements, which are technically those that need to be, done from that regulatory compliance standpoint.
Gotta ask our friends at EPT, right?
On the Ranton over here. Yeah.
I think the last component of that Jesse touched on is, violations that could result in legal penalties, financial losses, or reputational damage. And Jesse, what are the 3 R's, 3.5 that we always talk about?
I think that was yours because I always forget it. It's something like risk, reputation,
revenue, reputation, and then Jesse always threw in regrets.
Regrets. There you go.
The regrets, right, with the tattoo. What movie was that?
We're the Millers, actually.
Yeah,
I do know that. Did I let's quick aside here. Did I ever tell you that my family got to see a special screening of that movie because they sent out mailers in the town to everyone named Miller, and we went to this theater and it was all Millers in the theater to see a pre-screening of We're the Millers.
Did you meet some distant relatives you never knew, and you're like, oh, cousin Bob?
right, exactly. So interesting aside there, but
that's awesome. Hey, Aaron. Hey. How you doing? Via framework and penalties, censure, love that too. So what is compliance? I love what Jesse said about it's got teeth, right? It's got weight, it's got fines, it's got risk, revenue, and reputation and regrets. Because, we work with a lot of MSPs who work with a lot of HIPAA customers who don't care. Why? Because it doesn't have teeth until it does.
Yeah.
Until it does. And then it has big teeth. Right.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, we talk about compliance and regulations, and sometimes those are used interchangeably, but I think it's kind of like the whiskey and bourbon thing, right? Is not every whiskey is a bourbon, but every bourbon is a whiskey. It's the same thing. Not every compliance is a regulatory statute, but every regulatory statute does have a piece of compliance to it. So point being is that we have to think about when we're talking about compliance, what's the reason for compliance? And so I think that is the next thing that I wanted to dig into.
Equal security.
That's all right. You took the words right out of my mouth. So Tim, go with that. Run with that.
So we do hear a lot, and we see this on LinkedIn everywhere, where it's compliance equals does not equal if and or else then equal security.
Yeah.
However, whatever you put in that operator in the middle, compliance, security, whatever that operator, because there's such big debates about that. I tend to look at a compliance risk management framework, RMF, as a roadmap, as a guide, as the playbook. And compliance becomes the referee for security. Right? Compliance has the rule book, the playbook, the things to referee security. So think of it this way. Football, right? It's football season now, right? You have the guys throwing the flags on the field. They have a playbook. They do that because they don't want the other person getting their head smashed in, breaking a leg, Tom Brady, or whatever. They are the compliance people keeping the safety, security of the people in play. At least that's how.
I think one important bit there, right? It's also about whose security. So most of the time we're looking at cybersecurity and risk, right? Organizations are doing that, and that is about their security. Now, there are often times where there's a compliance regulation that may be improving my security, but it's not always about that, right? It might be about improving the security of those around me, whether that's a systemic risk, right? Where it may be a requirement about incident reporting, right? Incident reporting doesn't help me. That helps the industry know what is out there, or records retention requirements on a compliance. That often doesn't make me less secure from a legal standpoint.
Right.
But it's really making sure there's that evidence to protect those around me and the others, right? That they're in that spot to be able to hold me accountable.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. So I spoke last week at a conference in New York, and it was about insider threat and regulatory compliance. Most regulators only care about privacy data, right? Like They don't care about your security necessarily. They care about the security of the customer's data. They actually don't care if an employee walks out with your secret sauce and crown jewels. Most regulatory compliance does not care, which is incredible, right? Because like, what percentage of your assets fall in that category? So Jacob, that's a great point on, who's detriment, who are they trying to protect, right? Clearly the consumer is number one, I think, in most regulatory compliance or the compliance we're talking about.
Well, you look at the new FTC safeguards, and that's exactly it. Yeah.
I was going to say the FTC safeguards, the ruling that just came out the other day with the one-click unsubscribe cancel thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, here's another sort of compliance doesn't equal security, blah, blah, blah. We're all tech geeks, right? We all want to push ones and zeros and buy shiny tools to push buttons and make things happen. On the security side, we don't spend enough time on the privacy side. When we consult MSPs and they're like, we're going to do a HIPAA security assessment. I was like, well, what about the privacy assessment? Oh, there's a privacy? Like, we don't ever really talk about the privacy side as IT security people. We spend all of our time on the ones and zeros, bytes and bits, and not necessarily the GDPRs and the DORA. By the way, GDPR, DORA just came out. NIST 2 just came out. Australian 8. Like, we don't spend enough time on that privacy side. And if you look, almost every state has a privacy law on the books.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, is that's something that seems to be the way the winds are blowing, is that compliance is going to become more privacy centric and less cybersecurity centric, which leads to the point that I was thinking about as we were talking about all of this, privacy doesn't equal security. And I think that's largely because up to this point, many compliance frameworks and regulatory requirements have cybersecurity as part of a much broader set of rules that businesses have to align with. You think about SEC, for example, and SEC does a great job of, baking in, I think, pragmatic cybersecurity requirements for the organizations that are part of it. But there is a much larger, if you read the entire SEC rule, the entire book, that's like one small piece of all the regulations that you have to adhere to. And so as a cybersecurity professional, and Jacob, you'll attest to this, is that you're typically working with a compliance team who's working with like EY or somebody else, or, Salus, right? To handle their business regulatory requirements, and cybersecurity is a portion or a subset of that. So many times, if you don't have somebody like Salus doing it, it becomes a box checking exercise. Like, what's the least we can get away with to satisfy this portion of the rule and get on to the really important stuff, right? And so I think that's where that stigma comes from. But I do see, as we shift toward a privacy centric focus, that is changing somewhat. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Yeah,
no, that's really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, that is increasingly the case, and those elements are convergent. So particularly for the SEC, right, there's some matter of limbo, because there's a large cybersecurity rule, but that's still not finalized. But it's really what it is it's codifying almost everything in that proposed rule already exists. It's just in bits and pieces in other non-cybersecurity related regulations, right? And a mix of things that are in rules that say a lot of, you take reasonable measures, right? Or appropriate measures. And what does that mean? Well, then that's in separate risk alerts that are listed, right? So take things, but here are some suggestions, and then here's a list of how you might tackle that. And you often see it tucked in. It's sort of like we often see this at government legislation in other areas, right? There's something tucked in that's a pet project that maybe has seemingly little to do with, the intended point. And as a great example, like so Reg SP had amendments, as an SEC one, particularly for people who are managing information or money for private individuals. It's a privacy, part of that privacy rule, where they're also tucking in service provider assessments as a requirement on doing it, where it's kind of a tortured, right, an extension of the privacy, but then it's on the cybersecurity side. You can evaluate the cybersecurity of a third party, and you often have to kind of follow that trail.
Yeah, that's super. It's funny that you mentioned that because we could probably share some backroom stories about exactly how that's being navigated in certain organizations right now. But some doing it better than others.
I want to pop up here real quick because hold on, let me do this. Let me do this.
Jacob said something interesting as well about reasonable. So like some of these things get pretty vague as well, right? Like in terms of what's the litmus test on reasonable security? Go, Tim. Yeah.
No, I was just saying, like we were talking about privacy, right? And if we look at the privacy tracker, the link is on LinkedIn. If you look at the privacy track, like there's a lot of states already that have things on the books, in the works, like this little map. The link is in the comments. Oh, Jesse, look, this one applies to you, the Minnesota one, right? There's at least 20 or so that have laws on the books ready to go. And so us as MSP professionals, we need to make sure that, yes, we're looking at the security components, but the privacy things are equally important, right? And there's a whole lot of green on that chart that says passed and signed. So it's not going away.
Well,
but I think it matters as well, like enforcement, right? So like, let's see if FTC turns out to be like HIPAA, right? Like, are there HIPAA people banging on your door, right? Or is it just something from a compliance perspective that it only really matters when the damage is done and they're in lawsuit 5 years from now? They're like, oh, he didn't do HIPAA, right? Like, it's just another like thing to say.
My answer. You know my answer for this one, right?
Yeah.
You know where I'm going? I'm going to go right back to the very beginning of the conversation, which is the seatbelts.
Yeah.
Right? How many of us grew up with no seatbelts in the car? And then they started to show up in the car. And then now you can't drive through a state without clicking and ticket everywhere, right? So, as these things progress, and I actually think FTC is going to be the one that starts to roll it out. Some of the CMMC stuff that you're seeing now, too, in my brain, is a little test bed. Like they have a group of organizations that they can start to force this on. And we're going to see this thing come out over the course of the next maybe 5 or 10 years, where every small business, just like they did with NIS2, DORA, Cyber Essentials over in the UK, every business is going to have to do something. They're going to have to protect their crap and their customers' crap. And so just like the seatbelt laws, seatbelts started showing up in the cars in the 70s, and now you can't drive through anywhere without clicking a ticket. You're going to see FTC, I don't know, maybe a version of 853 CMMC or some equivalent of that in the next 5 to 10 years. That is my prediction.
And I think often it happens, right, where the enforcement isn't direct. You give an example, right? So you've got all those privacy laws. Those privacy laws may have damages. There are points about disclosure, reputational risk, that other side, right? The states might not be enforcing that directly until something is already out of the gate, and that's a problem. But cyber insurers are very aware, right? When they're looking at risk, what are they looking at? They're looking at ransomware, they're looking at PII records, they're looking at the damages of what would happen if they have to pay out on that. And so in a lot of cases, the cyber insurers effectively become that enforcement agent because now they understand, right, the stakes have really been raised on the financial damages with those regulations, which increases their liability. Right? We see something similar, in the financial world where, even for the SEC, who does have real enforcement, it's also heavily on, particularly for people who deal with institutional investors, right? Those institutional investors see that risk, they're aware of that risk, and they in many ways become the strictest enforcers of these regulations.
Jacob, how many of your clients use insurance or as like a qualifier, right? Like, has it come to that point where like, oh, you've got a great insurance policy, you must have great cybersecurity? It's not a proxy, I'm guessing.
I don't see it tremendously in my space because they tend to be. We're mostly working with investment firms that are fairly sophisticated, and they're usually going to have a direct due diligence process that is more intensive than that. So they kind of skip over that. They definitely will look at that with some of the vendors and service providers that they use. We'll see that less so directly with our clients, but when we're going out to their insurance brokers or their outsourced bookkeeping organizations, or even sometimes their law firms, right? They're critical service providers that we're looking at. That is something that will come up as a question and a point that we're looking at. And if someone doesn't have insurance, we'll raise it as a red flag, and largely for that reason, Tim, right? It's we want you to have the insurance, but even more importantly, we want you to prove that you can get the insurance.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting, you were talking about, how compliance doesn't equal security and how compliance is only getting more mature. But I found something super interesting that was brought to my attention is the new FFIEC approach that the CAT, their cybersecurity assessment tool, is being retired. And now they're taking an SEC standards approach where they want banks to start just applying a framework that they choose to their cybersecurity program, and it's more of a ambiguous do your due diligence type of thing, and then we'll audit you after the fact, or the auditors will decide if the standard you're applying meets the overall security requirements. So I'd be interested if anyone has a take on that or some thoughts on that.
I've been reading this because we get a lot of MSPs asking us for FFIEC. Like, again, the acronym doesn't flow off the tongue very well.
It does not.
They ask me all the time, do you have that framework? Yes, we have that framework, but
right,
it's probably going away.
It is.
So
going
what do
away.
we do?
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, 7 months ago, I couldn't, me, I live in absolutes. So probably versus is.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So you're right. And as we have been digging deeper into that, like, pick a framework. Okay, what framework? Great. I'm just going to pick some random framework, or I'm going to make something up. And so, there's this whole shift that we're seeing. Florida just did this not too long ago, right? They have this safe harbor thing where if you pick a framework and you're doing your diligence and you're proving that you're doing that diligence through whatever framework for that matter, and then they list a couple suggestions, and something happens, you could fall into this new safe harbor component that Florida has. For MSPs, who are probably the bigger attack surface than Bob's Donut or Joe's Lug Nut, right? I tend to have MSPs and suggest to them the CompTIA Trustmark. But the reality is, pick a framework. We say this all the time, right? How do we relate this back to, if we're talking about what is compliance, relating this back to our MSPs and our listening audience here with, what is it? What's in it for me? Why should I care as an MSP? There's 10 million things. Where do I go? What do I do?
Yeah.
So small businesses, like, I think people say, compliance doesn't equal security. And I'm like, well, you're in like the MSP channel kind of conversation on LinkedIn over here. I'm like, you realize that a lot of the times for small businesses, compliance is a great place to start, right? Like with frameworks, as you said, Tim, pick something, do something, go somewhere, right? Like, they pick up CIS, they pick up this CSF, whatever it is. Like, they have a security charter, right? They start doing all the things. So clearly, with big businesses, they're much further down the road. Jacob deals with some very sophisticated clients that understand kind of. He's not getting a total novice in the sale process. So, but I think with a lot of these small businesses, the Johnny's Lug Nut, as Tim said, or the donut shop, it's a great place to start. So, I think it does equal security there. So,
right. And I think, look, it's a potential immense differentiator for MSPs. And I think actually, we could look at this as something dangerous or scary. When you actually get the more vague set of these frameworks, is actually in a lot of ways increased opportunity, particularly right for that MSP to differentiate and to specialize in a vertical. I mean, we've started looking in the investment firm for years, right? And a huge amount of why most people in that space, will use specialized MSPs who get to charge a significant premium. And part of that is because they understand the nuances of where they're like, where in the world as reasonable and customary been defined, right? It's
Yeah.
not in that regulation. You have to understand that for this set, reasonable measures for a firm of this type in this market, of what that expectation is going to be means this, but not that, and where those elements are. And I think that's an opportunity for those MSPs who come to understand those elements to drive that as a huge differentiator for themselves, right? To be a premium and to really then help those businesses, right, and their clients to become more valuable on that other end, because the clients, they need to do that for their critical stakeholders and clients, right? So helping them to be able to be at that forefront of, we're really ready for this regulation, we're moving ahead, that becomes, something on the revenue side, not just cost.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kendra. I don't know why it shows LinkedIn user. It does that to me. But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, no, so it's really interesting, as something just occurred to me as we were talking. Compliance does not equal security, but I think that the equation's wrong, right? It's compliance plus security equals resilience. And so that's what I think MSPs should be talking to their clients about, is, helping the business be resilient, giving you the outcomes that you need for your stakeholders, for your clients, and for your bottom line. And I think that's the way to think about it.
Great. Now you're adding more operators to the map.
It's my favorite subject. I can't help it. No, but I think I think it's really important to think about it in that way, is that, when you're telling your client compliance does not equal security, why? My question would be, why are you saying that? Right? Like, compliance should equal security, right? Like, isn't that the intent of so it's almost like we're trying to hack the compliance system at that point. And that's not the way to approach it, right? I think we should say, how can we use compliance, meet these requirements, and leverage that to be not only a differentiator for your business, but to be not less than a zero-sum game for the business, and less than a cost center.
One of the things that we notice a lot too is it's actually a really great way for the MSP to then present to their customer the other tools and the other services in their business, like using it as a force multiplier to say, hey, listen, you fall into this guideline stuff, and we've identified some gaps and some risks, and we can fix all that. But this compliance thing, like, it's not us telling you anymore. It's insurance. It's a regulation. It's a law. It's a rule. It's a compliance framework. It's somebody other than the big bad MSP that just wants my wallet, taking my money. It's some other thing saying, hey, you should probably do this. And the MSP is best served to deliver that to you as a small business.
Right. How can we leverage this to get some things done in your business that you wanted previously? Right. So,
calling you out, Jesse.
And some of those are dollars. Some of it's a matter of, we've been telling them, you really need MFA in your VPN for 2 years, and the CEO doesn't want to do it because it's inconvenient. And that's another, it becomes that lever. I'd say almost every time we go in somewhere, we wind up with a conversation somewhere with the MSP of them saying, thank you. We've made that same recommendation 5 times over the last 2 years, but now that the compliance people come and say, you have to do it, right? Now you have to do it. And that's
I got big shoulders. Blame me.
Way.
Yeah.
Blame me. I'm good. I got big shoulders. I can take it. I want to get back to Aaron's comment here about disagreeing with Jesse. So I'm going to pull out. I'll give you a second to read it, Jesse, and then I'll pop you up and let you respond.
Yeah, I'll respond to it as well. So standards aren't perfect, right? So I think that's a little bit what he's getting to, is uniformity, but standards are, without standards, there's no way to judge people or judge security programs, or you'd have to go and do full due diligence on everyone. So standards are only there to save cycles, I think, and save expense and save time. They're clearly not like, every single one of us probably are like, that's a useless control in some framework, right?
Yeah. And
if you went through CIS 8 and the whole, the Matt Lee activities, right? Like they're trying to improve it, right? Like
Yeah.
CIS is 5 years old, right? It's version 8. So
Yeah.
what's
Version
happened in
9's
the
on the
last
way.
3 years with attackers? So
Yeah.
that's why I made that comment on curiosity equals security, because you need to be today, right? You need to be current, like you need to be changing things up. So it's going to be stale, but at a minimum. So go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, no, I think, I wish we had the ability to like pull somebody in, because I think this is a really great conversation. And I think in the frame, we do. If he wants to join, we should talk through this. This is awesome.
I'm gonna ping him right now.
All right, cool. Yeah, that'd be great. So you have to go back to, again, my deeper background with SEC regulated and, investment and publicly traded companies is that when you're thinking about materiality, right? And I think my understanding of what I said, the punitive measure of compliance, is I look at compliance as anything that's going to have a punitive result if I don't follow it. So when I look at the fact that I could get shut down, or I could have massive fines, or I could have things that end up being highly material to my business, and by being compliant, I protect myself from those things, or at least mitigate those things. That's where I'm looking at it from a resilient perspective, and saying that compliance does actually bleed into resilience, and that if you're not compliant, you're less resilient as a business.
And I'll take that a step further and say it actually helps build that defensibility, right?
Yeah.
We talk a lot about defensibility, right? We talk a lot about due care, due diligence, right? Oh, and here he comes. All right, we're going to bring him on up here. So we talk a lot about this. Hey, buddy, it's been a hot minute since we've seen you, right? Figured we'd pop you on in over here. How are you? Welcome to the team. Give a 2-second introduction.
Afternoon. Hey, Ron Peters with Tech Squared. We are the MSP that you guys keep talking about. So that's pretty much my 2 seconds.
So I thought let me move Jesse over here and let the two of you just kind of beat it out for a minute, because I'm just going to pull this up here of, hey, you disagreed? Well, fine. Let's have a conversation about it.
That's phenomenal. Jesse, go ahead.
So yeah, I'll just quickly reiterate what I said, is that I think the frame that I'm looking at that through is kind of how I started off the show with my definition, quote unquote, of compliance. So I think compliance has to do with anything that has a punitive measure to it. And so this is fresh in my mind because I was doing some resilience planning with the executive team of a publicly traded company that I do a vCISO engagement for. And we were talking about how to create resilience in the organization through compliance adherence, saying that, if something material happens and we don't report it properly and we don't adhere to the compliance report properly, we're subject to fines, business slowdowns, even existential level events from the SEC to our business. And so that's where I say compliance does have a hand in resilience, in that if we're not compliant, we create a less resilient organization. So I guess that was the frame that I was looking at it through.
Okay, so from the punitive damage side of things, as opposed to actual resilience of the business continuity, which was the frame that I was looking at it from.
Right, I figured.
So I look at it from smoke detectors being required. They are nothing but an audible alarm, versus camera systems being optional. Camera systems actually protecting the actual investment and saying, now we can apply punitive to the interloper, the intruder, or the person that actually started the fire, versus a smoke detector or fire detector that just tells people to get out. So that was the framework that I was coming from, was the business continuity side of things, as opposed to punitive damages side.
Yeah, and I figured it was like a category definition thing, right? Yep. So, but Tim, I think that speaks exactly to what you were just saying. So I think you should reiterate that again, right?
You mean defensibility, or Tim? Sure.
No, I'm sorry, Tim Golden, where you're talking about how compliance facilitates resilience there, right? And I think that's
because it helps. Because it helps build that defensibility, right? So, Aaron, maybe you've experienced this. Maybe you've asked your customer, hey, that accounting system, it has 2FA. We want to enable that for all of your people that can touch money. And your client says no. Right? Maybe you've experienced that. I don't know. I've talked to a lot of MSPs where they're like, we keep telling them and they don't do it. It's hard. Right.
But I was just going to say, and the standardization of practices throughout the MSP are going to be what dictates that. To Jesse's point of the punitive damages, if you're not going to your point earlier, Tim, you said MSPs being the largest attack area or largest attack vector, they're the golden goose. So if you don't have those standards in your practices that say, hey, we're doing this, not, hey, do you want to do this? therein lies both the resilience and the business continuity aspect of, if you're not doing this, then we're probably not a good fit, and we both need to go our separate ways.
Yeah.
Love the
Love,
good.
love to
good
hear an
fit.
MSP say that.
Love that, right?
But, that pulls in both yours, Tim, and yours, Jesse, of punitive damages and compliances. Is you are going to be compliant with our requirements for your business, or you're not going to be.
Yeah.
We're not going to service your business.
Let's make a very clear distinction of the words that you just said. I am the MSP, and I'm going to rephrase and hopefully get it right. I am the MSP. I'm you, and you. The words that you said were, Jesse, your business is going to be compliant with the way that we run as an MSP, which is vastly different than compliance that we've been talking about for almost 40 minutes, right?
To Jesse's point of it being a framework, perspective framework.
You are your own SRO in that manner.
Everyone had the same exact.
And the penalty is you will not be our customer. So there is a penalty there.
Right. Yeah. That was a very unique distinction there, which was, we want to make sure we have our own house in order as an MSP, de-risk ourselves as an MSP, build to maintain our own defensibility. And when Jacob doesn't want to put 2FA on accounting, probably not a good customer. Not that Jacob is doing that, but
2FA.
CEO said he didn't know that.
But I think there's a point right about how far you're going to take that line. Like the NFA thing might be there. We see this that in highly regulated industries, the MSPs that operate in highly regulated industries, they tend to be more successful at being able to have a higher minimum standard, right? Okay, everyone's going to do MFA, but okay, what's the point now where we're going to decide, right? And a lot of MSPs have that as a standard. Does every MSP have only company enrolled devices, with MDM and MAM and full conditional access policies shall be allowed to connect to any company resource at any time, right? Not everyone has that one. It is a lot easier to get that one sold when the regulatory agency says you should put in access controls such as mobile device management.
Right.
Conversation easier. So it's still a way for the MSP to continue elevating their standard on where that requirement is going to be.
I think I'd like to hear from Aaron. Is that what you were asking when you said the thoughts of the regard and of compliance being used as a scapegoat for security? Is that what your question was referring to?
It is.
Okay. Yeah. So I think Jacob just put a nice little bow on that for you.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about safe harbor as well, right, Tim, in Florida? So, I mean, if you're doing compliance to a bare minimum, it's kind of this, you get a free pass to some degree. So,
yeah. So, any parting words before I kick you out, because we're going to wind down. and you can't say I disagree with you, Tim.
No, I know. I think the realignment in the framework of security and compliance in that conversation, I think, was probably beneficial not only to me but to others watching.
That's great.
Because the perspectives and areas from which we're looking at is going to greatly change the definition. So to Jacob as well, appreciate that bow at the final wrap on that.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for joining. We've never done that before. I'm like, hey, somebody's over there. We should pull them in. So, hey, great test use case. So thanks for coming on. Happy Friday.
Later.
Right. Have a good rest of your week.
That was well.
Well, that was fun. We've never done that before.
Yeah, that was great. I love doing off the cuff. Yeah. So now no one's going to come because they're going to be like, they're going to ask us to jump on live now.
I had a podcast a while ago where they gave out the StreamYard link. So everyone was in the green room. There was 50 people.
It happens. Maybe they didn't have some sort of compliance checklist to make sure that it was properly distributed.
Yeah,
funny.
Let's just go with it.
All right. So we've got about 15 minutes here. We started the conversation of trying to figure out a definition of compliance. We landed on, some framework, some regulatory, some controls, some lists, but also the component of risk, revenue, and reputation in regards, like financial components, like losing money, like, so we kind of wrapped that up nicely into a bow. Like compliance is following a thing that may be a law that might have some money tied to it in the simplest terms. You know, as an MSP, what does that mean to me? Well, Aaron said it directly. If you're not complying with us as an MSP on how we're operating, we're probably not going to have you as a customer.
Well, and I think to piggyback on that and to take that a step further, right? If you are an MSP that's operating in a regulated industry and you're providing controls and kind of helping or enabling a customer of yours to skate the line of, like, you know, playing with that, you know, box checking or almost unethical way of meeting standards, you're putting your business at a lot of risk in that industry by doing that, and by the regulations by doing that. So I think for especially for MSPs in regulated industries, that is a great way to approach the conversation, right?
Schnurr or Jacob, anything to say to our MSP audience about everything that we've talked to thus far?
Yeah, so like I said, I think it really is a bare minimum standard. I think standards, as soon as they're put out, get stale. Attackers are evolving; they're quick, right? So you need to continue to be curious about new tactics, right? New TTPs and how these attackers are getting in. Looking at the Verizon breach report every year, at a bare minimum, like, how am I going to stop those top 5 attacks? So compliance is great, and compliance is largely, you know, based on frameworks that are somewhat stale, or, you know, the lion's share of it is good practice, right? Like, so, and that bare minimum will get you, you know, potentially insurance and a get out of jail free card out of Florida, as Tim was saying. So, but I think at a bare minimum,
free card.
that doesn't exist. That doesn't
Safe
exist.
harbor is something vastly different than do
Right.
not pass go, collect your $200.
Right. So, but so, like I said, compliance is great, but don't think that's the end all be all. You need to continue to be curious. You need to continue to iterate and look at how these attackers are getting in. So, that, you know, and I think that's a gripe with a lot of people about compliance equals security, because it's not, you know, how old's NIST 800-171, Tim? Right? Like,
how old is NIST 853?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, what's happened in that time? All right, AI, automation. So that's a big thing, and you know, we need some kind of standard, because if there was no standard, how are you going to evaluate the good from the bad? So compliance is just that. So.
But think of it, like FDR decided as part of his presidency that he was going to build roads and infrastructure. Why? Because there was no guidance, there were no paths, there were dirt streets, they weren't maintained, and nobody knew how to get to where they wanted to go safely and efficiently. Compliance can do that. It can help you. Right. Frameworks can help you get to go where you want to be in a safer, sort of guided manner.
Yeah. And I think as we have this conversation, all of our talk about the, you know, what's the right operation of compliance equals security, compliance is not equal security, where those are, have been flashing through my mind more and more in this conversation. Is not the operation, but the Venn diagram, right? Compliance does not equal security, but those are 2 circles on the Venn diagram with a whole lot of overlap between them. There are going to be some things that you do just to check that box. They're there for compliance, or they're there for, you know, someone else's security. There's some security stuff that compliance frameworks don't care about, but there's a whole lot of this stuff, right, where there is some really good overlap. And, you know, and I think about, you know, what these things mean for the MSP. You know, I kind of hit this already before, but to repeat, because I do believe it passionately. My MSP mostly worked with investment firms, you know, been in that space as well, that those regulations, the opportunities to differentiate yourself as a higher value MSP, and those opportunities to use that as a way to advance what you're looking for from a security perspective and to get clients compliant with your standard, I think that those are just incredibly powerful tools.
Well, yeah. And so, I mean, I think even if we're talking about the Venn diagram, taking that a step further is if we think about like in Calc 2, when you take the area underneath the curve and you wrap it around the, I'm just kidding. I watched him get mad at me in real time there. That was funny.
Get mad at you. It's fine. We have Marnie Stockman for all that math conversation. We should bring Marnie on at some point. She has all
Seriously,
that math conversation.
there you
Actually,
So
wasn't
funny.
Marnie the very first one that we did? Now that I'm thinking about
I
it.
think
I think
so.
Marnie
One
was
of the first.
very first.
Yeah.
Anyways, all right, I digress. I don't know. Squirrel.
Well, so last thing on this, I know we're running out of time here, but I kept wanting to go back to this because I keyed on something Jacob said about, reasonable, the language of like a reasonable approach. So you have to know for the industry that you're working in, what the barometer for that industry is for the size of client or size of organization that you are. And so one thing that popped into my head was the word about defensibility, right? So I think a lot of these standards are moving toward a defensible narrative for why you did what you did. And you can't do that with box checking. That is where you need a security program. Again, the FFIEC change is a good example of that, because they're saying, we want you to demonstrate how you're measuring risk and providing due care through those risk management methods. Well, you could do that, 20 different ways, especially depending on the type of organization that you are. And so it's on you to create a narrative with an ongoing security program. And so I think, as Jacob said, that provides huge opportunity for MSPs and other providers who are building out these programs to be able to do that.
Look what CIS just put out not too long ago. A reasonable cybersecurity guard. Right?
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah.
What is the fourth word? Make your cyber defense, i.e. defensible, reasonable, right? There is a guide to actually defining reasonable cybersecurity. So, yay to our friends at CISA.
It's a little vague, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
Christian Redmond, you guys know him. Good security is reasonable, insurable, legally defensible. So
there you go.
Legally
Love it.
defensible. Yep. Well, and that's the
Insurable.
point, right?
Yeah.
That's the point of this whole conversation is you follow a thing. That thing has some been put together by a bunch of super smart people. It gives you some guidelines and some roadmaps. Our friends over at CISA gives you reasonable, right? In a court of law, what's the word they always say? Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
Right? Which is basically what our entire society here in the United States has been built on. Beyond a reasonable XYZ.
Right. And depending on the framework, something you mentioned there, Tim, just resonated in the sense of depending on the framework, right? Reasonable could be not necessarily complying with every item on it, but going through that framework and having the justification, right? So one of the things we tell clients all the time if we're going through a risk assessment that, we're not expecting you to get 100 on this test. No one gets 100 on this test. If you're doing it, you're spending too much and you're making your life too inconvenient. But what you should come out of this is where there's no question that's going to surprise you. And whenever you have that question, you're challenged on something, right?
Yeah.
If you're not doing it, you can explain why you thought about it. You made that reasonable, defensible choice,
Yes.
and you're prepped for it.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have our last 7 minutes. We tend to, talk through and have at least one key takeaway from us. I don't know if Tim or Jesse or Jacob, either of you are ready for your key takeaway. Let me see over here. Someone popped up. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So go ahead. Here.
Yeah. So my final thought is that security plus compliance equals resilience. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Spicy. So no, but I think that doing that and looking at it through that frame and talking about it that way with your clients is something new that maybe they haven't heard. And so I think you can use it as a differentiator to start positioning yourself as an expert in their industry and showing them how compliance and security is not a zero-sum game. It's actually a competitive advantage for their business.
Love that. What about you, Mr. Tim? You got
Sure.
something, or you bring Jacob up instead?
I'm good to go. So
No, let me do this.
well, it doesn't matter. So compliance is, I think it's almost like a certification, right? You have these professional certifications that are very common in white collar jobs. It's a bare minimum standard, maybe not bare minimum, but it's best practices. Like it's usually, targeting some kind of framework. It is not the end all be all. And attackers don't care about, a framework that was put out 10 years ago. So you're looking to protect your data. You're going to need to continue to evolve. And that's why I think we consistently get this compliance doesn't equal security, because it's lagging, new TTPs that are out there. So just continue to be curious, continue to evolve. You can have endless curiosity and never satisfy it, because attackers are going to continue to make that next move. So
I love the curiosity. Didn't they say curiosity killed the cat? Maybe curiosity. Oh, I love this. Curiosity cured the compliance. All three.
Well, how about this? The FFIEC cat is gone. Curiosity killed the cat. Yeah.
I see.
Don't even get me going. My mouth is not working with acronyms the last couple of weeks. But
Yeah, I'm a
All right,
dad,
Jacob, you're up.
All right, I'm not. Mine won't be as snazzy as the other guys here, but building off what Tim said, I think that's some of that area, right, where compliance and security, I think they do not keep it anywhere. There is a lot of overlap, but it's also important to understand where those differences are. As Tim was mentioning, those areas of security that might not be covered by compliance. But then the other thing, which is if you look at compliance not as an onerous bare minimum that you need to accomplish, it really can become a huge opportunity both for that value differentiation, but also for accomplishing the things that most of that stuff is stuff you want to do and you should do anyway.
Good things. Good things. I suppose I should probably give my 2 cents as well. So one thing that I'd like to have our MSPs take away from today's conversation on what is compliance. As you're building these services out, as you're adding potentially a compliance as a service offering, number one, don't be afraid. There are plenty of experts out here in the space willing and wanting to actually help, whether it's Jesse or Jacob or ourselves. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of us here willing and wanting to help you and your customers along the way by using compliance to build that defensibility in you and in your customer. Almost like I practiced that.
You changed the background. You got the
I love it.
always be selling.
No, it's just off the cuff. So I know I have a call coming up, so I got to kick everybody out here in a couple of minutes. But hey, Tim, what's going on in a couple of weeks? We're trying to get back on this schedule.
Well, part 3, right? So I screwed up the order, but we're saving the best for last. What is risk, right? And I think it's really
It's a board game I used to play as a kid.
There's not a lot of people that have the title of head of risk at SMBs, at MSPs. How do we incorporate? First of all, what is risk? Why does it matter? Jesse does a really good job, I think, bringing this into a lot of his curriculum. Dr. V CISO that he does. So. Why is it important, and how we'll talk about it all, right? Like how can you help sell and build trust with risk? We'll really span the gamut on why risk is important and why you should keep a better eye on it. So
you say what is risk? It's interesting because I've been playing with titles, CEO, all the things, and I came up with one and it got shot down, which was Chief Risk Wrangler. Got shot down. I thought it was great. They're like, yeah, no, you can't. Not Jeff. I'm like, it's great because you got to wrangle the risk, right? I don't know.
It sounds like Michael Kelly House of Cards or somebody.
I have some friends, one in particular who is a CISO for a larger corporation, and they actually changed his title to Chief Risk Officer. So
Nice.
interesting
Okay.
shift we're seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a thing. It is a
It's like
thing.
the,
All right, everybody.
Mr. Wolf.
Have a great. I'm taking us all out.
See you guys.
Week. You can just keep bannering. I'm just going to end the stream. Hey, do the things, right? You know, the what is it that we always try to do?
Like and subscribe.
No. I think it's this.
How about try 500 tools? How many I have in my stack? Go into the vendor. Do it now.
I don't know.
All right, everybody. Go ahead, Jesse.
What numbskull would do? What numbskull would let themselves be recorded saying something like that? That's what I want to know.
I don't know. It's a risky thing. Cheers.
Later, guys.
Subscribe now.